I'm Paige. Today's class is going to be less of a flow-focused sequence and more of a skills and drills and guide to creating a breath work linked with your TVA or your transverse abdominals. So we'll be starting off working on the breath and how to efficiently use the breath to activate the TVA from a supine position. So most, if not all, of today's class is going to be on our backs. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And yeah, it's a beginner's level or an all levels class really, with some really advanced and nuanced ideas on how to, again, efficiently activate the TVA. So there's no right or wrong way to do anything that we're about to do, or there's no really right or wrong way that you should be doing this in your everyday life or in your yoga practice, your strength training practice. But this is just one way to use the core muscles, especially your deep core muscles, efficiently. So you're using less energy, you're spending less time, and the more you practice this, you should be more adept at just doing it and then incorporating it into your lifestyle or movement practice. That being said, when I first learned all of these things, and I learned them from actually my doctor, and the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time I tried doing these things, I couldn't do it. It was very hard to get my brain to have that proprioception to understand these tiny, tiny nuanced movements. So that being said, if you can't get this the first time, the second time, and you have no idea what I'm talking about, revisit it either by watching this video again or doing it on your own, and eventually you'll get it. And don't feel discouraged if you're not getting it by yourself and you feel like you need someone else to help you. Eventually it's just something you get, and it's a lot of tactile help too. So using your hands, we're going to do a lot of like touching of our torso and our system while doing this to really help you create that mind-body connection and experience. So don't get down on yourself if you can't do this the first time. The reason why this is important and I want to teach this is because the TVA is a stabilizer muscle, and when we can better understand and acknowledge what that does and feels like in the body, we can start to better understand how to get into more difficult postures in yoga or in strength training, such as balancing postures or learning how to handstand. And when we can understand how to better control that stabilizer muscle, those postures start to make more sense and could possibly become easier. At least in my experience, I have found that. So this is merely an exercise in learning how to connect your brain to those muscles, learn what it feels like, and eventually learn how we can apply these movements and nuanced exercises to our daily practices. This is not to say that anyone is lacking stability or we're not already stable in those muscles. We're already doing all of this work, and our body is smart enough to turn on these muscles when it's needed. This is merely just to be able to recognize when those muscles are working, when we can feel it, and what does it feel like. You're probably thinking, what are we going to be doing? So we'll get started on our backs. Just lay flat, and if you need a block, grab a block now. We might need just one block later on in the class. I prefer cork blocks. I prefer the weight, or a wood block, but maybe not a foam block if you can avoid it. So keep your block readily available. We won't need it for a while. Lay on your back. Get comfortable. Knees can face the sky. We can get comfortable in a constructive rest, so feet wider than hips distance, knees knocking into one another. Just start to breathe normally as you would. We're not noticing or judging anything quite yet. Just regularly breathing as you would to start the class. We'll be going over and touching on a lot of different anatomy parts today. So we'll begin class by talking about the rib cage and the purpose of the intercostals, the muscles between each of our ribs, and how they play their part in aiding our breath and aiding our lungs expanding to take in breath. We'll be going over the diaphragm as well, the pelvic floor, the pubic bone, our sacrum. So all of these components will play together to help us understand how to use our breath to activate our transverse abdominis, our TVA. And if you don't know, our TVA is one of many core muscles. It's our deepest, most inner core muscles that we don't really think of or consider when we're moving as much as we probably should. And that's okay, because our TVA works on its own. It's activating without us even thinking about it. So it's not crucial that we think about it every moment of our movement practice, but that being said, it's important to be conscious of it and to know how to activate it on our own so we can move through modalities of movement with less effort and more ease. So you're probably wondering, like, why are we doing this? And it's like, there's so many reasons. I could talk about the TVA all day. Anyways, keep breathing. Taking deep inhales through the nose and exhaling either through the nose or out the mouth, whatever feels comfortable for you. Start to bring attention to your rib cage, the front of your rib cage, the side of our rib cage, and the back. Taking deep breaths. Use your hands and feel the tops of your rib cage. You can even make a C shape with your hands and basket the rib cage from the sides. And notice what your rib cage is doing as you take each inhale and every exhale. Maybe you feel it expand outward, expand forward, or feel it in the back of your mat. There's no right or wrong answer. I think in yoga a lot we tend to focus on belly breathing because it's relaxing. It can be nice to belly breathe and it has its time and its place. But realistically, our lungs aren't in our belly, and I think we often forget when to step out of the belly breathing, and we'll take that mode of breathing outside of the mat. And this is just a reminder as we do these breathing exercises that our rib cage plays a very, very important role in helping us efficiently take in and expel air out of our lungs. And there's other organs that help, and we'll get to that, like our diaphragm and our pelvic floor. But right now, use your hands, place them on top of your rib points. You might feel them, they're pointy. If you don't feel them, that's okay. It's right above your breastbone, right below your sternum on either side. Just place your hands in that general vicinity. And just giving gentle pressure to that area. And if it's easier for you, you can even do this on your belly, because that will really accentuate keeping the ribs down. We want to focus on sending the breath 360 degrees of our rib cage. So really using the rib cage to expand through those intercostals as we're taking a breath in. So inhaling through the nose, press into those rib points, really feel the air expand through all areas of the rib cage. You might feel your back elevate a little bit and move on the mat. And exhaling, we're going to do the same as we press into the rib cage. We want to think about sending those rib points down towards our pubic bone. So our pubic bone, you want to use your hands to feel, it's probably 6 inches below your belly button. It's pointy. You maybe feel it, maybe you don't, and that's okay, but search for a little bone that kind of protrudes. It's not an area we're often palpating, and it can be weird, but I often use this place as a reference point. So thinking about, on our exhale, sending those rib points down towards the pubic bone, and we'll try this together in unison. So expelling all the breath out of the system, inhaling through the nose to send all the breath through all 360 degrees of the rib cage, and exhaling, sending the rib points down towards the pubic bone. You can even use your hands here to help press the air out through the rib cage. And this isn't an intense movement with our hands, it's just a guiding gesture, gently closing the rib cage down. So we think of it as opening, expanding, then closing. We're not going to be finding much movement in our belly as we're going to be doing this. So without me cueing you, go through this a few times, inhaling and expanding, exhaling and condensing. Do that a few more times as I start to introduce to you the diaphragm. And you might be thinking, oh, that wasn't that easy, or maybe it was really easy. But as we start to introduce these other parts of the body, this method of breathing should and hopefully gets easier, because we're going to start to manipulate the body into this positioning that creates this line, or as I like to call it, closing the mouth of the core, or as some you might have heard from other people, creating a stack. And while we create that stack, or as we create that stack, and as we close the mouth of the core, which I'll explain further on, we'll make it easier and ultimately more efficient, as I've been saying, to breathe up and down instead of out and in. So the diaphragm is an organ underneath our lungs, and it's responsible for being a vacuum for our lungs. So every time we inhale, the diaphragm is pulling the lungs down, and every time we exhale, the diaphragm is pressing the lungs out to help us expel all of that air. So thinking about this, it's this up and down motion. And where the pelvic floor comes into play, there's many muscles in our pelvic floor, or our pelvis, and you use them all the time, whether you know it or not. They're always in some sort of engaged posture or relaxed posture, depending on if you're sitting, standing, sleeping, whatnot. And the way the pelvic floor comes into play is every time your diaphragm is pulling the lungs out, your pelvic floor ideally will be relaxing. And when your pelvic floor relaxes, it creates space for all of the viscera, our organs, to sit temporarily in our pelvis. And you're thinking, what? We're moving our organs as we breathe? Yes. Even though we probably don't tend to think of our organs in our torso and our body as moving pieces, they don't sit stationary in our body at any point of any time of the day. And they're constantly moving because they're attached with fascia, and they need to be agile and flexible as we breathe, or if we have a baby and they're constantly moving. So I'm sorry if this is long-winded. I feel like it's important to explain these things for us to better understand why we're doing these things and how we ultimately do them. So our pelvic floor, as it relaxes, all of our viscera, as our diaphragm is pulling our lungs down, temporarily is housed in our pelvis. And as we're exhaling and everything is coming back up, the diaphragm is pushing our lungs back up, the pelvic floor contracts to help press our organs back into our torso and out of the pelvis. And ideally, when all of these things are functioning as one and functioning together, we're experiencing this like elevator effect. So everything's going up and down, our lungs up and down, our organs up and down. And not many people, including myself for the longest time, are always doing this efficiently. And I'm not saying you have to be doing this efficiently every second of every day, but it really helps you when you're trying to do certain movements effectively to help contain your organs and this up and down instead of everything going out and in, and it's just a mess. So the best way to describe contracting and relaxing the pelvic floor, because you're probably thinking, I didn't even know my pelvic floor did all those things. Every time you go to the bathroom, every time you pee and you urinate, you are relaxing your pelvic floor. So imagining just letting everything go, you're gonna pee. Don't actually pee. But that's the idea of relaxing the pelvic floor. So every inhale, we're relaxing the pelvic floor as if we're gonna pee. Bear with me. Every time we exhale, we're holding everything in. So every time you've had to really hold your pee in and pull everything to the center, that is the sensation of contracting the pelvic floor, bringing everything back up. And now, and I hope I haven't overloaded you with information, we're going to try to combine all of those things together to create the ideal physiological breathing. So remembering our rib cage, that 360 expansion, the pulling down of the rib points towards the pubic bone, and simultaneously keeping in mind that diaphragm going down the pelvic floor, relaxing on an inhale, and exhaling, everything coming back up. So take a moment, get back into your ready position, and get ready to inhale. You can use your hands anywhere on your rib cage or on your stomach, wherever you'd like. I like to take, personally, my thumbs on top of my rib points and my fingers as close down to my pubic bone as I can. They don't necessarily touch, but it really creates this almost scrunching action to help me find that connection. So inhaling, filling up the lungs and the rib cage with air at all angles. My pelvic floor is relaxed. Exhaling, everything pulling to center, rib cage, rib points pulling down towards the pubic bone. Pelvic floor is engaged. Inhale, reverse this motion. Relax the pelvic floor. Send the air into the rib cage. And exhale, contract. Try doing a few breaths on your own, inhaling. Take one more breath on your own and come back to your starting position, breathing as you would. Again, this is not something that I would expect anyone to be performing 24/7. It's something that'll help us prepare for this next part our TVA and efficiently activating it to help us in other movements. So you're probably already thinking, oh, maybe I could feel my core engage a little on that exhale, and that's great if you did. The TVA was definitely working for me, and I could feel my core muscles start to engage as I exhale, and that's because it was. As you exhale and the pelvic floor contracts and everything starts to come together, your TVA is also working with the diaphragm and the pelvic floor to expel the air out. So there really isn't a time where your TVA isn't working. It's a hard working muscle, even if it's not a mover muscle. It's not a big muscle like our quads or our glutes. That being said, what we're going to be doing today is just to, again, help conscientiously understand when the TVA is efficiently working as one, and know when it's not. So the TVA, if I haven't already explained it, it's a corset muscle, our deepest core muscle. So we all know our six-pack muscles, or you've seen six-pack muscles in some capacity. Those are our most superficial muscles, and they only go on the anterior part of the body. So they start at the rib cage and they go down to the pubic bone, and they are on the front. Our obliques are on our side. We've got all kinds, but our TVA actually extends all the way to the back, to the front, wrapping around our entire torso as if it was saran wrap. It's really holding everything in together and protecting our organs. The reason why I introduced the pelvic floor during our breathing, not just because it helps our actual breathing, but the pelvic floor does play an integral role in helping to activate the TVA. When we contract the pelvic floor, it really makes it somewhat easier to engage the TVA, and particularly the low belly. So it can be really hard in these exercises to target the low belly and really turn on that portion of the core. And by activating the pelvic floor, you might notice that the low belly can turn on a little bit easier, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. But really, we're just trying to activate the TVA as a whole, which can be really difficult. That's basically the moral of all of this. So in order to move forward, I will introduce not only how the rib points and the pubic floor play a role, but also our sacrum. So our sacrum is one of the lowest portions of our low back. So right underneath our lumbar spine, we have our sacrum, and then we have our tailbone. So it's that flat portion of our low back, kind of where our glute muscles meet. And that portion of our back, we're going to be thinking about that as sort of a magnet towards the back or towards the ground, towards the mat. And as we magnetize the sacrum into the mat, you almost want to think of it going through the floor, and then pulling the rib points down towards the pubic bone, and the pubic bone up towards the rib points. That is really our action of closing the mouth of the core. And I don't want to confuse this with doing a crunch. We're not doing a crunch in any of these exercises or activations. It's really just this action of creating this seal. So we're not in this open position, this exaggerated position where our rib points are facing up towards the ceiling, our pubic bone's facing somewhere over that way. It's really just this magnetization of the rib points towards the pubic bone towards the rib points, and the sacrum pressing down into the mat and sealing the space of your back to your mat. And when you already start to do these actions, you can start to feel things work. And we're going to go through this, and it's going to be really hard for me to talk, and I already apologize if I'm not cueing as fast as we're working, because I'm already working as I demonstrate pressing my sacrum into the ground. So let's do that all together, keeping in mind our breath, moving the breath up and down, contracting the pelvic floor on our exhales, sending breath out of our rib cage on our inhales. I'm already pressing my sacrum into the mat. Use your hands for this tactile feedback so our brain can understand what's turning on. And I'll lift my shirt up a little so you can start to see what's working and what it looks like. So get ready, kind of move your body into a comfortable position. I like to lengthen the back of my thoracic spine, so already just helping my rib cage get into a position where I know I can easily glide the rib points down towards my pubic bone. Our feet can be further the hip distance apart, or you can still be in a constructive rest. I find that if you have trouble finding this activation at first, this is where the block comes into play. You can, on the lowest or median setting, squeeze it in between your legs and your adductors, which are essentially an extension of your pelvic floor, will help you find these sensations, especially in activating the lower portion of your torso. So that is a great option if you want to find some further activation. It is also harder, so beware. I'm going to try it without the block. All right, inhaling, sending the breath out of our rib cage, relaxing the pelvic floor, belly stays in, and exhaling everything out of the system, contracting the pelvic floor, pressing the sacrum through the mat. Use your fingers if you'd like to feel the rib points going down towards the pubic bone towards the rib points. And as the pubic bone moves up towards the rib points, that will also help you lengthen the tailbone and better help you press that sacrum into the mat. Inhale. Use an audible exhale. It might help you feel that further contraction. And I don't know about you, this is already very, very hard. Remembering to contract the pelvic floor on your exhale. Use your sacrum, still pressing into the mat, creating a seal from back to mat. Feel those rib points. Feel that pubic bone. Keep pressing everything down into the mat. Use your fingers and start to press around on all the areas of the belly. Keep pressing the sacrum into the mat to keep that contraction. And maybe you feel certain areas that are more turned on than others. Maybe you don't, and that's okay. I always like to feel around my low belly. For me, that is a point of contention that tends to have more difficulty turning on. And this can also range from side to side. Maybe your left side is more turned on than your right. Maybe not. And this is why we practice these things. Because as we continue to practice over time, we might find that we can build on these weaker areas. I'm gonna say it again. When I first started doing this, I couldn't do it at all. Not even in the slightest bit. I had no idea what I was feeling for. Even with the tactile feedback and trying to give myself proprioception, there was nothing. It took a lot of practice. And on my own. I didn't necessarily need constant guidance. It was just something that my brain needed to practice over time, and then finally I started to feel it. Okay, we'll take a break. Slowly come out of this, finding or taking the sacrum, peeling it off the mat just slightly, coming back into a neutral position, and finding some more elongated inhales and exhales. It can be hard to put that breathing technique into effect when you feel like everything is tightened and condensed. But over time, you can feel the breath move up and down, creating an easier breath as opposed to the breath being sent out and in when the TVA is contracted so heavily. And try it out one more time. Exactly how we did before. So starting by getting comfortable, really setting the rib cage onto the mat, already preparing to send our rib points down. I also want to mention this isn't a really there's no tucking of the pelvis while we're doing this. It is a natural tuck because our pelvis is in more of a posterior tilt, but there isn't an accentuated tucking action. The sacrum pressing into the mat automatically lengthens the tailbone, so we don't really need to use the glutes to help us get into this tucking position. Obviously, the glutes are going to be used no matter what. We can't isolate muscles, but I just want to mention that so we can just understand that this is a very tiny, nuanced movement and not this exaggerated tucking of the pelvis, in case you were wondering. So rib cage is set. We're already pressing the sacrum into the mat, creating the seal of the back to the mat. Taking our inhale, relaxing our pelvic floor, sending the air throughout our intercostals. Exhaling, pulling everything to center. Rib points to pubic bone, pelvic floor contracts. We'll do about 5 more breaths at our own pace. Remembering to use your fingers if you'd like, to give yourself some feedback. You can also feel the back body as well, because we're activating it. Last breath. Keep pressing that sacrum into the mat. And slowly come out of it, finding neutral position, peeling your sacrum off the mat ever so slightly. I hope that you're feeling something or some light bulb is turning on in your brain, even if you're not feeling it or understanding this right away. This is a great place to stop and to digest and to process. If you'd like to keep going though, I will introduce 1 or 2 progressions that we can utilize all this information and start to find movement in making this a little bit harder. So what I mean by that, and you can take the block, set it in between your legs, squeeze it really hard. You might already feel your low belly turn on. And again, this was a lot to already process and to understand throughout the class. This next part's totally optional, but if you just want to understand, or you can just watch, because this next part is just a great way to understand how we utilize
what we just learned and put it into practice, albeit very, very small movements. All we're going to be doing in this next part is lifting up our feet. And that might sound really, really easy because I can just lift up my foot without doing anything, and my core isn't engaged, and it really isn't any effort at all. But it becomes more difficult and more nuanced when we take everything we just learned and we try to isolate that movement. So if you see how I'm lifting up my leg now, my hip points are moving, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we do what we just did and keep everything tight and contracted and try to lift our foot, it suddenly becomes a lot harder to keep those hip points still. And again, when I first started doing this, there was no way that I was able to keep my hip points still. That was just an entirely unknown concept for me. So this is something to think about. Maybe it's something you try today. Maybe it's something you come back to on your 4th, 5th, 6th try. You can do this again with the block, without the block. I find that the block not only helps you better activate, but it helps you better stabilize the hip. So it's not really cheating, but it helps. And we'll just get right to it. So exhale to start. Sacrum is already pressing into the mat. Hip points are down towards the pubic bone in towards the nose, towards those rib points. Feeling everything turn on. Use your hands, feel around, double check. And we'll just lift up the left foot a millimeter. You might feel your low belly turn on even more. Set the left foot down. Put your hands on your hip bones. So you can help give you feedback to see whether they move or not. Again, it's okay if they move. They're gonna move a little bit, but it's just this exercise in seeing how we can isolate movements and really stabilize the TVA. Ready? In your next inhale, exhale, lift up the right foot just a millimeter or a centimeter or whatever. And lower. I'm going to try this without the blocks. For me, it's actually kind of easier to do it without the blocks. I don't know why. I'll try it again. Press the sacrum in the ground. And the more you press the sacrum in the ground, the easier this will be. Lift the left foot just a bit. And set it back down. Keep the engagement. Keep breathing. Even though it might not seem like you're breathing much. Lift up the right foot and set it back down. We'll go side to side a little bit faster. Left foot, right foot. Left foot, right foot. Oh, my hips moved a little bit. Go back and forth at your own pace. This can be really, really slow. One more time. Right foot, left foot, and rest. It really doesn't look like much, but I'm really, really tired. And maybe you're not, and that's great. And you probably just have a really well-controlled TVA, or you're exhausted too. I think we're all going to be different when it comes to these exercises. I think this comes naturally to some and not naturally to others, like myself. This is not something I was born knowing. I'm going to continue to practice that exercise. We'll do one more, and it's really not much different than what we just did. Just more movement this time, which would require more control. And this time, instead of just picking up the foot, we'll bring the knee towards the chest, keeping the rib points down towards the pubic bone. We're not crunching. Our head's not coming up off the mat. It totally could, though. There's nothing wrong with this. You'll definitely feel more of an engagement if you lift your shoulders up. And you can go there when you feel like you've gotten this down. And then moving our knee from our chest, will slowly straighten it out at any degree. The lower you move your foot, the more of a chance your sacrum is going to peel off the mat. So find the distance from the ground that works for you, where you're able to still maintain control and work from there. So pulling the right leg in, keeping the connection of sacrum to mat as we extend the leg out. Continuing to feel around, making sure things are on, things are working. Contract that pelvic floor. Bending the knee and finding extension. Maybe playing around with the distance from the ground. Really pressing that sacrum into the mat. And releasing, sending the right foot back down to the ground. We'll try it with the left foot, and then I'll leave you there. Inhaling to prepare. Make the seal with the sacrum, rib points down towards the pubic bone. You get the idea. Pick the left foot off the ground, send the knee towards the nose, maintaining that closed mouth of the core. And on the exhale, send the leg out long, playing with the distance from foot to ground, finding what works for you while still being able to maintain control. Inhale, bring the knee back into the chest. Exhale, extend the leg out long. You can even feel around towards the back body, making sure there's still that seal. Bring the knee back towards the chest. We'll go extend it one last time. Again, feeling around what's on, what's working. And bring the left foot back to meet the right. Find your neutral position. Relax. Take whatever breath feels right in your body. And feel good knowing that you may have learned something new today, hopefully. If not, then you did something fun, hopefully.
I want to thank you for practicing everything with me today, practicing with me today, and learning something new, experimenting with something that may have been a little weird or felt a little weird in your body. And I appreciate you being here with me. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks. One last thing, I love offering these free classes, and I plan on doing more in the future, more regularly. If you really like this class and want to see more free classes, I'd love it if you could potentially donate a small donation. I will link my Venmo in the caption. If not, that's fine. I really want to make these accessible classes, and any help is much appreciated. Thank you.